world didn't stop when George Custer and the 7th Cavalry were dismantled. Okay, the world was going on. And who was the president? Grant. Okay. All right, in the election of 1876, this would be a really interesting election because the Democrats are very confident of victory because Republican President Grant had so many scandals during his presidency that the Republican Party just had an incredibly bad name. Historians will tell you that Ulysses S. Grant might have been the worst president this country ever had. Okay, a lot of scandals, a lot of problems, etc. So the Democrats were pretty darn confident of victory. They chose a governor from New York by the name of Samuel J. Tilden as their candidate. Governor Samuel J. Tilden of New York would represent the Democratic Party in the election of 1876. Now, since you have never heard of a Samuel Tilden as a president, the Democrats might have been a little bit too overconfident. They nominated, they being the Republicans, another governor of Ohio by the name of Rutherford B. Hayes, which might be a little more familiar name for you. So the Democrats choose a governor from New York, Samuel J. Tilden, and the Republicans counter with Governor Rutherford B. Hayes of Ohio as their candidate. Now this, we've talked about weird elections like the Jackson where he had all the popular votes but he didn't get the electoral votes and how that went crazy into the House and all that. This one might be the weirdest presidential election we've ever had, how it turned out. Governor Tilden, the Democratic candidate, received 250,000 more popular votes than Governor Hayes. Governor Tilden, the Democratic candidate, received 250,000, that's a substantial amount, more popular votes than did the Republican candidate, Governor Hayes. But what counts? Electoral votes. On the first count of electoral votes, Tilden had 184 and Hayes had 165. So when they counted the electoral votes, the first count, which tells you that there's going to be a second count maybe. So the first count of electoral votes also gave Governor Tilden the advantage, 184 to 165. Here was the issue at hand. Tilden was one electoral vote short of majority. One. Okay? So that's the issue at hand. Governor Tilden wins the electoral count, but he's one electoral vote short of necessary majority. So what happens in a case like that? Goes to... No, we're talking about a nomination. What happens if you don't get the amount? Come on now. If on a nomination go to a second ballot, then a third ballot, then a fourth ballot. But what happens? That goes to the House of Representatives. And so ordinarily when no presidential candidate receives the majority needed for election, it goes to the House of Representatives. Well, we had a problem. That would have worked out fine, except there were 4 states that during the election sent in 2 sets of returns. 4 states didn't send in 1 set of returns, they sent in 2. Okay? So, Tilden is 1 electoral vote short of winning the presidency. It normally would go to the House of Representatives to be decided, but then it was discovered that 4 states, South Carolina, Florida, Louisiana, and Oregon, all sent in 2 sets of returns instead of 1. Somebody screwed up. So South Carolina, Florida, Louisiana, and Oregon, South Carolina, Florida, Louisiana, and Oregon sent in 2 sets of returns. Now, at the time, guess how many electoral votes these 4 states gave? 20. Well, he's 1 short. And these 4 states would add up to 20 electoral votes if they would have done it right. You think he probably would have got that 1 vote? And if the other guy would have got all 20, he would have won by 1. Okay, so that's how crazy this is. But the chances were good that Tilden was going to get 1 of those states. Okay? Well, they decided they would have a recount because the 20 crucial votes were up for grabs. And Tilden needed how many? How many did Rutherford B. Hayes need? All of them, because then he would have won 185 to 184. Okay? So who's the advantage to? No question. Well, if they're going to have a recount, what are those 4 states going to have to do? What? Revote. They're going to have to do the popular vote over again because they're going to have to figure out the popular vote versus the electoral vote, because whoever wins the popular vote in South Carolina is going to get those electoral votes, right? So they're not just recounting electoral votes or trying to figure out which set's right. They're going to, according to the United States Constitution, all popular votes in these states had to be counted, okay? Well, what's the next question? This is a pretty big deal. Who? You were going to say it, Will, I think. Well, not yet. Who? You got to recount these. Who's going to count them, right? You got to get a non-biased bunch to count them, right? You can't have all Republicans count them or all Democrats count them. You have to come up with a commission or committee to count them. And it was known as the Electoral Commission. So in order to count those votes, Congress created what was called the Electoral Commission, and they put 15 members on that committee. And their job is going to be to count these votes in all these 4 states. Okay? Non-biased group. So in order to break the deadlock, Congress created what was called an Electoral Commission, and they put 15 members on that committee to recount those popular votes. They don't want any screw-ups. Are they going to vote again? Or will they get 2 sets of returns? It's a mess, isn't it? The question's still up. Are you going to vote all over again? Or are you going to try to count this set of returns? Or are you going to count this set of returns? What are you going to do? But here's what the commission was made of, and that's going to make a point what I just said. They put 5 United States senators on that committee. 5 U.S. senators. Which, what do you got to worry about? Well, what? Yeah, well, so what are you determining that by? You're going to put 5 senators on. It's an odd number, isn't it? Right, so that's very good. On these 5 U.S. senators, 3 were Republicans and 2 were Democrats. 3 and 2. I don't know why they made odd numbers and made 15, but they did. But it's going to be all explained in the end. So they put 5 U.S. senators, 3 Republicans, 2 Democrats. What would be the next group they might put on there then? If they put 5 senators, they probably put 5 members of the House of Representatives. 5 senators, 5 members of the House. Now how'd that have to be split up?
3 Democrats.
3 Democrats, 2 Republicans to make it even, right? So they put 5 U.S. senators, 3 Republicans, 2 Democrats. They put 5 United States representatives or members of the House, 2 Republicans, 3 Democrats. Who else might? What would the other 5 be, do you think? I mean, I'm not expecting you to know this, but I'd be pretty impressed if you did. What are the other 5 people? Good guess, but they're biased.
Independents.
Well, kind of. These next 5 are going to be affiliated with a political party, but who are they? They're not senators, they're not members of the House. Who else? Who would you grab to be the next 5? What? Supreme Court justices. Well, we got a problem because there's 5. Well, what they did is they picked 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats, and 1 that was considered nonpartisan, that did not have a political preference. So the 3rd group were Supreme Court justices. Very good, Courtney. And they picked 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats, and 1 that was nonpartisan. Well, the nonpartisan justice, his name was David Davis. He's the nonpartisan one. David Davis is the one guy that's supposedly nonpartisan. Well, he resigned from the Supreme Court because he had been elected to the United States Senate, and he could not serve in both capacities. So right after they appointed him as the nonpartisan person, he was elected to the Senate and resigned. So what would you do if you were making the rule on this commission? What would you do when he resigned? If you could find one. Problem was they couldn't find one. So instead of just saying, well, that's fine, are we even right now?
Yeah.
Instead of saying we're even, they picked another guy. Because they wanted 15, and he was a Republican. Well, this thing, the point is, this thing was so screwed up. You know what they did instead of recount it? The two parties, the Democratic and Republican Party, what did they do? They made a deal. They made a deal. It's a weird deal. I mean, it's just, it doesn't make any sense. The Democratic Party agreed to accept Rutherford B. Hayes as president under the 3 following conditions. They made a deal. Did the people speak and pick this president? No. They were so screwed up over these returns, they made a deal. The two parties got together and said, hey, the Democrats said, hey, I'll tell you what. Don't make a hell of beans which one of these guys go as far as I'm concerned. But we'll let your boy Rutherford B. Hayes be the president, but here are the 3 things you're going to have to do. Remember, this is 1876. First thing that was agreed to, if Hayes was going to be the president, is that all federal troops that were still located in the South after what? The Civil War would be removed forever. They still had a military presence in the South in 1876. The Union did, so to speak. So the first agreement that where are most Democrats from? The South. So they said, we'll let Rutherford B. Hayes be president, but you got to remove all federal troops from the South. But they were still there from the Civil War. Okay? Second thing, what would Hayes agree to do as far as his cabinet went?
Choose all Democrats.
Not all, but he would choose some Southerners. He would agree to choose a fair share of Southerners or Democrats in his cabinet. Okay? He would balance his cabinet. He wouldn't be to the victor belong the spoils, Andrew Jackson, where he put all of his supporters in there. He would agree to appoint a fair share of Southerners or Democrats to his cabinet. Now this is 1876. What happened to all those railroads that went across the South during the Civil War? They destroyed them all. So the third thing was that the North would agree not only to build, but to pay for, and the North being the Republicans, to build that railroad across the South that was damaged during the Civil War. So, the 3 things the Southerners or Democrats agreed to just to make Rutherford B. Hayes the president is 1, all federal troops located in the South would be withdrawn. Number 2, the new President Hayes would agree to appoint a fair share of Southerners or Democrats to his cabinet. And 3, the North would pay for and build a new railroad across the South. When those agreements were agreed to, Rutherford B. Hayes became President of the United States despite the fact his opponent received a majority of the popular vote and the electoral vote. Isn't that incredible? That's how that election ended. That's how it ended. Now I'm going to give you 6 notes about President Hayes. Tell you some things about the guy. Where is he here? Right here. Rutherford B. Hayes. Tell you some things about him of interest. Number 1. It's okay. So just some notes about President Hayes real quick, like after the election. What is the president's wife referred to as? First Lady. President Hayes' wife became the first lady to have earned a college education. President Hayes' wife became the first lady to have a college education. Another note about the president and his wife, they had 8 children, which was quite a few children. Not a lot of presidents had 8 children. They had 8 children. Guess what prestigious university that you hear about all the time President Hayes helped found? Think about where he's from. Where's he from? Which university? Prestigious Buckeyes. Ohio State University. He was instrumental He was instrumental in the foundation of Ohio State University. Here's another thing about the First Lady. They called her Lemonade Lucy. Her name was Lucy. They called her Lemonade Lucy while she was First Lady. Why'd she do that? Why'd they do that, Chantel? Why'd they call her that despicable name of Lemonade Lucy? Think about the videos you've been watching with President Grant and Sherman and Sheridan in his pool hall or in the office. Why'd they call her Lemonade Lucy? She served lemonade in the White House instead of alcohol. She banned alcohol in the White House. And she served everybody lemonade. So she became known as Lemonade Lucy. Another interesting note about President Hayes. He was the first United States president to have a telephone in the White House. First U.S. president to have a telephone in the White House. And we just missed this by just a little bit when we took the seniors this year to Washington, D.C. It's something that happens yearly at the White House. And what did we just barely miss? It's a big deal now. And Mrs. Hayes started this tradition. She was the first one to do this. What was it? Anybody know? What? Easter egg hunt at the White House. That's a big deal. So Mrs. Hayes was the first lady who started that tradition of the Easter egg roll on the back lawn of the White House. And we just barely missed that this year when we went to D.C. because we went earlier. So they had some big deal. The Easter egg roll is a big deal. Two big deals at the White House on holidays. Thanksgiving, the president always pardons the White House turkey. They rotate some turkey company, so to speak, or people who raise turkeys, turkey farm. They bring in a turkey and they present it to the president for his Thanksgiving turkey, and he pardons the turkey, and they take it off and they bring in one that he doesn't talk to eat. You know what I mean? That's a big deal. And then this Easter egg roll is a big deal. Okay. All right, well, let's talk about some difficulties for President Hayes. Why he had a tough presidency. Okay, some difficulties for President Hayes. Now, what's going to cause you difficulty as a president? What? And how are they going to do? What's the big? This is true for anyone. Congress was controlled by which party during his presidency? Democrats. Anytime you have a Republican president and the Senate and the House is controlled by the other party or vice versa, it's a difficult time. Very difficult time for the president. So he faced it throughout his administration, the fact that Congress, which was the Senate and the House, was controlled by the opposite party, the Democrats. And he really didn't have a lot of, well, he had some opposition from members of his own party. I mean, he got the presidency through a deal, right? So he had issues with his own party members and issues from, obviously, the opposing party. Now, because of how the election of 1876 came across, the Republican Party split into two groups. Okay, the Republicans split over this whole deal. The Republicans split. And the two groups were known as the stalwarts and the half-breeds. That's the names they gave themselves. So the Republican Party split in half. Different opinions. Some liked Hayes, some didn't. But what it did is it caused the Republican Party to split in half. And the two sides were known as the stalwarts and the half-breeds. The stalwarts were the group that hated Hayes. They referred to him as Granny Hayes, as a derogatory remark. So the stalwarts did not like President Hayes. And they referred to him as Granny Hayes, which is a derogatory term. The half-breeds half-heartedly supported Hayes. They didn't hate him, but they at least supported him a little bit, but he wasn't their favorite. Does that make sense? The poor guy was just struggling. And the half-breeds were led by James G. Blaine of Maine and John Sherman of Ohio. So the leaders of the half-breeds were James G. Blaine of Maine, you'll hear more about him later, and John Sherman of Ohio. They were leading the half-breeds, and they weren't 100% in favor of Hayes either. the bottom line is, and we're not giving you a lot of detail on these elections, we're just kind of moving to political elections, but he had a horrible administration. I mean, he had no fun. Because it was better than having a Democrat. That's their feeling. Okay, it's a good question. So, we'll move on then to the election of 1880, because we're just going to kind of get through these, because there wasn't any significance to any of these much. But we're going to tell you if there was. The 1880s, for 4 years of Rutherford B. Hayes, he's miserable, the country's miserable, Congress is miserable, it's just not a real good time. Well, the Republicans are split, and they've got to come up with a nomination in 1880. And anytime your party's split, that's not good for your chances to win. So anybody want to take a guess who the Republicans were considering nominating for the presidency? One we just talked about, the leader of the half-breeds. I said that he'll come up later. James G. Blaine of the half-breeds was one possible nominee. Okay? Guess who they were considering going back to? Back farther. Grant. That was a possibility. The Republicans were going to go back to former President Grant. No offense, but that's how hard up they were. Okay? So they were in tough shape here. Well, the party went back and forth between Blaine and Grant and Blaine and Grant, and neither one arose much enthusiasm. So what happens normally when you're not too happy? Let's say we're interviewing for the new assistant principal we're going to get, okay? And two candidates come up that we're not that hot about. What are we going to do? We're going to look for another one, right? And that's what they did. They actually went to what they called a dark horse candidate, and that was Senator James Garfield from Ohio. So since neither one of either Grant or Blaine